You are watching Big Tech. We are on episode 73. Notes are out in chat. If you're not in YouTube, very good. Good for you. Congratulations. PATRIOT'S.com. Go to the shows tab, find the Big Tech show banner. You will get the notes, archive notes underneath the category of read, watch, and think for yourself. Today we are on episode 73. We were going to go over antennas, but I'm not ready to deliver that yet. It turned into a much broader scope project than what I originally thought it was going to be. So we are going to look at brain-computer interface technology. We're going to look at Anna Avatar, which is part of the X Prize, which is a group that, or it's a program or project funded by Peter Diamandis and others. And then we're going to look a little bit about the Anna Avatar in detail, and then we're going to start looking at patents that really get into the future space of how we're going to communicate in the future. And it's no longer going to be with cell phones. Let's just put it that way. The first one we're going to watch is new brain-computer interface technology.
It's good to be here. My name is Steve Hoffman, but in Silicon Valley, they call me Captain Hoff. That is my nickname. I am the captain of Founderspace, and Founderspace is an incubator and accelerator.
Really? Hang on.
It went black. Here we go. Yeah, an incubator and accelerator that works all over the world. So I spend 70% of my time traveling the globe looking at new technology. We have over 50 partners in 22 countries. And Founderspace has been rated by Forbes magazine as the #1 accelerator for overseas startups in Silicon Valley. We have had many famous startups.
All right, so this is, computer is deciding to not respond. Bear with me. Nonetheless, what this guy's getting at is that this guy is basically one of those people that goes from the Silicon Valley and looks around the world for cutting edge technologies to then build partnerships, share technology, take technology, whatever you want to call it. Nonetheless, we've shown this before many, many months ago. Some of you may remember this, but if you haven't seen this, it gets crazy what this guy's going to talk about.
Startups in our co-working space, Soma Central, like Instagram, AngelList, Foursquare, and today I'm going to talk about some of the technologies that most fascinate me. So, technologies are the future of the brain, our human brain, and where it is headed with technology. So if we examine our brain, we will realize that for over 100,000 years, our brain has remained the same. But the world around us has changed radically. So think about it. We have the same brain as a prehistoric cave person, as a Neanderthals, it's same brain. But the world has totally changed. That is the power of our brain. It's very elastic. It can reprogram itself.
So this is very important piece to keep in mind is the brain is elastic and it can be reprogrammed. And that's pretty standard in the industry, so to speak, if you're a psychotherapist or otherwise. It also explains why or how humans learn and how we can retool and retrain ourselves even after we get out of formal education. So it's a critical piece to keep in mind while we're going through tonight's show, but also just in life in general. And what it really means is that the human brain has the luxury of being adaptable. And that's a double-edged sword. We can adapt to becoming weaker, or we can adapt and become stronger. We can adapt to be independent, or we can adapt to become slaves.
But now we're going to begin to change our brains. And we are doing this with new technology. Now, some of the basic technology out there, EEG, allows you to actually measure your brain waves. And these devices can tell if your concentration levels. They can be used to actually move a cursor on a screen. There are applications for these devices in entertainment. They're working on them for controls for games. In medical, these devices are being used for conditions like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and ADHD and other conditions. And they're being used for education. They have applications now for children to study. And they measure their concentration levels and can actually change the applications as the children learns.
So you can see that this technology, albeit this is old technology, it's come a long way, where they're using software and algorithms and learning mechanisms so that stimuli can be adjusted, meaning if you're doing well or you're doing something poorly, the program will change whatever the activity is for you, however you're participating. And in this case, the way that we participate, we think of it as we're watching something on a screen, or we're interacting with a mouse, or using a gaming remote control, something like that. And we've seen some demonstrations where they're using their brain to do things like fly an airplane on a screen, or move a cursor around on a screen, or type on a screen using their brainwaves. These are rudimentary techniques as it relates to where we're going. Imagine for a moment using your brain to communicate your intentions, your emotions, your thoughts, your feelings directly to somebody else without saying a word, or without even being in the same room, potentially being across the world. It's a whole lot more dynamic than sitting in front of a computer and moving a cursor around just because you're thinking about it. So it's the difference between looking at a grainy photograph versus putting on a set of VR goggles and going into virtual reality. I mean, it's that big of a jump with respect to where this technology is going, directly accessing the brain in order to provide an interface to interact with the digital world that can then be translated back into the biologic world, back into somebody else's brain.
But where we're headed, and let me tell you, 1 minute, is these devices are now capable of actually recording dreams, but not in a very granular way. In a very primitive way, they can actually capture and identify what a person is dreaming. So they have done studies where they've hooked these devices up to a person's head, they've had them dream, they woke them up, and then they asked them to recall memories in their dreams, and they read the patterns of the brain. And then the person goes back to sleep, and if they dream of the same things, they can recognize those patterns. That is just the beginning of where we are headed. Right now, scientists in laboratories around the world are developing brain chips. Now, these are chips that can be inserted into the brain, and they are wireless.
Okay, well, we know about Elon Musk, Neuralink. We know about the company by the name of Kernel, Kernel, doing the same general type of thing. We know that they have ECOG arrays, electrocardiography arrays, that are used for driving prosthetics and for interacting with digital devices if you're complete quadriplegic, if you have ALS, something like that. And we also have danced a little bit around this idea of nanotechnology as it relates to some of the things that Charles Lieber was involved in, whereby they put transistors, many transistors, into a cell and are able to talk to it with radio waves and drive cellular behavior. And there is work that Lieber's done with the Air Force Research Laboratory that's publicly available that discusses creating cyborg cells in neurons in order to help create brain-computer interfaces for the military. And I can show you that, but not yet. It's on humaninternet.org if you want to look at it. If we have time tonight, I'll show it to you briefly. We've covered it previously, so we'll continue.
And let me show you. They have actually had a monkey that broke its back. So its spinal cord was severed. The monkey was paralyzed from the waist down. But they inserted a chip in the monkey's brain, and then they inserted another chip in its lower spine. And they allowed the brain to communicate with the lower spine. As soon as they did this, the monkey could walk again. That is amazing. Totally amazing. So they could actually transmit the thoughts of the monkey wirelessly to parts of the body. But it gets even more amazing than that.
So why do we still have people in wheelchairs? And secondarily to that, the obvious answer is we haven't gotten to human trials and blah, 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 whatever. Secondarily to that, what does cybersecurity look like when you infuse electronics into the brain whereby those electronics interact with the brain and then drive muscle and skeletal movements? What happens if that was compromised? What does that do to free will?
So they now have in a laboratory monkeys with chips in their brain. And then they have an electric wheelchair. And just by thinking, just with the thought of the monkey, they can drive the wheelchair around. Think about that. If a monkey can do that, what could you do if you had that chip in your brain? They have also done experiments with monkeys with a chip in their brain and a robotic arm. And the monkey, just by thinking, can reach out and grab something like food and feed itself. That is amazing if you think about it. So the monkey's thoughts are actually able to control things outside their body. So when we start to think about the future, about where technology is headed, this is where we're going. We will have brain chips in humans. And the people who will get those brain chips first are people who suffer from severe medical conditions. So if you have a severe medical condition, like you're paralyzed from the neck down, or you suffer a brain disorder like Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease, and that brain chip can restore your quality of life, would you hesitate to get the chip? No, of course not.
So what we've seen when we look at the DARPA discussions about neurotechnology, and when we look at the patents that come out from Harvard, MIT, hospitals, Stanford, etc., this is what they cite when they deal with neurotechnology. They cite correcting diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, epilepsy, etc. And they also cite being able to interact with your psychology. So if you have a mental disorder, depression, those types of things. This is what drives the funding to perfect these technologies.
You would say, put the chip in my brain. So that is starting right now, these experiments. And even more interesting, Scientists have done experiments with rats, and they have chips in the rat's brain. And what they did was they taught a rat how to do certain things. And when the rat did all these complex things, it could get food. Now, it took the rat weeks to learn that. Weeks. But then they hooked the rat's brain chip to the internet. And they had another rat in another city. And instantly they connected those two rats' brains. And do you know what happened? The other rat knew how to get the food right away. It did.
Yeah, so there are neuroenhancement, cerebral programming type of patents for humans that discuss doing the same type of thing, whereby they can look at a baseline of, let's say, a professional athlete, basketball player, football player, whatever, look at their baselines and then measure their brain waves while they're performing some function as an expert, as a professional athlete. They can then overlay those deltas, those changes in the brain waves onto somebody who is a novice at that particular sport. And they've demonstrated being able to dramatically improve the rate at which the novice individual learns and picks up skills. And it ranges from cognitive skills, just thinking, to finer motor skills like painting or writing, up to general physical skills, walking, running, jumping. So everything within the human condition has been looked at as it relates to overlaying someone else's brain waves onto your brain, for example, who happens to be an expert. Those expert brain waves are then inserted into your brain so that you can accelerate your learning. And we will cover those types of patents in the near future. We're not quite there yet. But this is, and that will be a service that you'll pay for in the future. Renting software that is, some football player who's good at whatever their position is in football, tight end, quarterback, line, whatever. And if you're that in college or if you're that in high school, you literally could pay for something like that to be delivered to you while you sleep through structured dreams, so that when you wake up and you practice, your brain is already familiar with those brainwave patterns. And so when you actually go practice in the real world, you have those imprints already programmed into your brain so that your performance can be enhanced. That kind of stuff's coming.
Didn't have to learn anything. The knowledge was transferred from one brain of a living animal to another brain. That is amazing. That opens up a world of possibilities, because if they can do that in rats today, imagine 10 years from now what they can do in humans. And we will go there. So, mind-to-mind communication. This is something of science fiction that we all read about. But this is actually possible today, as I just showed you. So there will come a point where if we have a chip in our brain, and you out there have a chip in your brain, we can communicate. We can communicate without talking. We can communicate when you're halfway around the world. And we can exchange knowledge. So, if you look at a world where we have these chips that are connected to the internet, all of a sudden, every piece of information on the internet becomes accessible to our minds. Now, when we look back at today and we have to go to Baidu or Google and type it in, that will seem so primitive. Nobody will do that. You will just think, what knowledge do I need? And it will appear there for you to use.
So I was going to wait, but I'm not going to. We're going to digress for a second here, and I'm going to show you where this is going and how it can be implemented today. Charles Lieber, Cyborg cells, molecular nanoscale circuits for active control of cells. Air Force Research Laboratory, final report in August of 2018. And the goal of this work is to develop molecular nanoscale circuits that control cells via external radiation. External radiation, external radiation. Radio frequencies, millimeter wave frequencies, light, sound, electromagnetics, external radiation. We developed silicon nanowire probes as platform elements of these circuits and demonstrated their insertion into single cells, followed by stimulation to elicit cell signaling. Finally, achieving a scalable modular nano device platform capable of recording high amplitude intracellular electrical signals in electrogenic cells, meaning neurons, in your neurons. In parallel, we developed a conformal deposition technique and site-selective deposition of polymers to modify probes. Site-specific deposition of polymers to modify probes, which means they're able to create complex transistors and circuitry components that can then be delivered to cells and assembled in the body. And an approach to decorate nanowires with heavy metal-free quantum dot emitters that provide a strong, macroscopically addressable and reproducible nanoprobe emission signal. So now we're talking about addressing cells, and we're talking about being able to reproduce some functionality, whether it's their location and or whatever it is that they're doing as it relates to stimulation. And we're dealing with quantum dots, which in fact are able to generate quantum entanglement properties. I'm not saying these do. What I'm saying is that they use quantum dots. There are many different variations of quantum dots to do things like create quantum communication, quantum entanglement. And this is talking about depositing nanotech into your cells that drive the electrical functioning in your body. This is by Charles Lieber. And in this document, they go through all of it. You can download it off this website, humaninternet.org. And there are other patents here to look at, nanobioelectronics, that talk about putting nanotubes or nanowires into biological components such as neurons, right? So it says cells and neurons positioned in electrical communication with one or more nanoscale wires. They talk about being able to address these things. You can have more than one nanowire in a cell to create circuits. It says nanoelectronic devices can be readily reconfigured. So this is the cyborging that will allow that brain-to-brain communication that they're referring to. This one is nanoscale sensors. So the very same components, just configured a little differently, can sense what's going on in your brain. So you're able to read and write from a single cell in the body. Unique addressability to biological species and may be used for in the body, in vivo, or in vitro applications. When used in the body, the nanoscale sensor and corresponding method result in a minimally invasive procedure whereby it can be ejected, absorbed, consumed, or inhaled, and then delivered, steered to the brain or to your nerves, because your nerves consist of neurons as well. Scaffolding comprising nanoelectronic components. Scaffolding. Conductive pathways can form an electrical circuit internally contained within a cell scaffold and or that extends externally of the cell scaffold. So inside cells, outside cells, combinations thereof. And electrical circuit is in communication with an external electrical system, such as a computer or a transmitter. For instance, a radio transmitter. That would be something like a cell phone, Wi-Fi, cell tower, radio tower, television tower, satellite, radio transmitter, wireless transmitter, an internet connection, etc. Any suitable conductive pathway may be used, for example, a pathway comprising metals, semiconductors, or conductive polymers. Nerve cells within the tissue may form axons or dendrites. These are the components of a neuron with the nanoscale wire in order to transmit and or receive electronic signals from other nerve cells and or from the nanoscale wires. Keep in mind, these things can communicate with the internet. Cyborg tissues can be created whose biological functioning depends not only on the cells or the tissues, but on the electronic components as well, such that the distinction between the biological and the electronic systems become blurred. So you say to yourself, okay, great. Well, I'm going to get this stuff in my food or in my water, or it's going to drop down from the sky. Oh, paranoid, this, that, and the other. It doesn't matter because they're not going to know what to do with it, right? It's just going to get in my body. It's going to be chaos in there. No, that's not true. They can dope it and direct it and steer it with magnetic fields. They can dope it with DNA or other biomarkers that have selective site acquisition. We've gone over this on this show months ago. We'll do it again because it's that important. So even if it gets there, how are they going to really make it talk on a network? Well, I'll show you that. Because what you have here is a patent from AT&T that discusses routing policies for biological hosts. And this patent discusses being able to put every single cell onto a biological subnetwork. Every single cell onto a biological subnetwork. Communications device may receive neurological signals from a neurological area network in a brain. Communications device may then forward or route neurological signals to the external communications network, meaning to the internet, through the phone, for example. Woman's neurological signals may thus be transmitted and sent into a cellular data network and or a Wi-Fi network for routing to some distant destination. The woman's communication device may also receive signals from an external communication network, meaning the internet, that are destined for her neurological area network. That's just the brain. It also talks about being able to do this with the body, separating the two. Each different biologic region may be addressable to send and receive communications from the network. Communications device receives a biologic signal. The biologic signal may again be identified with its particular biologic region within a body area network. So they're making a distinguishing remark between the brain versus the body. Once the biologic region is known, the interface application consults a routing table, just like it does for the internet today, only it's now for your body, for the corresponding biological address assigned to the biological region. Exemplary embodiments may include biological subnets, just like the way the internet works today. IPv6 bitspec, providing an example, a generic internet protocol address where the subnet indicates that a predetermined number of bits in the IPv6 specification may be reserved for biological subnets. Each neurological region within the brain and or each biological region within the body may thus be addressable using a particular subnet. So, just as a communications device may have its own unique internet protocol address, each neurological region within the brain and or each biological region within the body may have its own unique internet protocol address. In this way, signals and communications may be addressably routed to different destinations within the brain and or the body. One person's body area network may communicate with a different person's body area network. One person's neurological area network, their brain, may communicate with a different person's body area network. As one person's network are addressable, different people and animals may conduct intra-host communications. In more simple terms, one person's brain may control another person's body. One person's brain may control another person's body. Going back to the cells, I will show you where it talks about, here it is right here. Each biological signal may be received from or identified with a different biological region within the body area network. Some biological signals may originate from or be identified with an arm, while others are identified with a leg. Granularity may even be finer, thus identifying biological signals from a hand, finger, toe, or even a cell. One single cell. So we've got the Liber stuff, talking about nanoelectronic components, putting multiple pieces of nanotech in cells to be able to read and write to cells, stimulate cells, creating cyborg cells, and I'm quoting out of the patent, literally creating cyborg cells. And you have programs, one of many, whereby this gentleman was contracted with the Air Force Research Laboratory to create nanoscale circuits for active control of electrogenic cells known as neurons. Here we go.
But it gets even weirder, stranger, because we will not only be able to transfer knowledge, but we will be able to transfer memories. Now, so you could have an experience like skydiving, and all of a sudden you could transfer that experience to a friend, and all of a sudden they have experienced what you have experienced. It gets even weirder, because we will be living our lives as our lives. We know our lives and our memories, but you will all of a sudden have access to anybody's life who wants to make it available to you. People will open source their lives so others can download pieces of their lives and experience those things. That will be really strange. We won't know the difference between our own memory and a memory we acquired from someone else.
I'm gonna let that sink in. We won't know the difference. We won't know the difference between our memories and memories that are downloaded into our brain. The same will be true for your thoughts. The same will be true for your sensations, what you smell, taste, touch, and feel. And we will get there tonight. There's technologies now that are able to synthesize and simulate all 5 senses. This is where the internet is going, folks.
Think about that. It gets even stranger. So, all of us are here learning at CEBS, right? Getting EMBAs and MBAs. Well, this will be obsolete because CEBS will literally be in the cloud, and you will just download from all the best minds in the world whatever you need to know when you need to know it. Our brains we will no longer have universities as we have them today. That will change. Information will be on demand. Information will be commoditized. Knowledge will be commoditized. All of us will be smarter, have infinite amounts of storage, and infinite access to information.
Did anyone else catch the contradictory statement there? Information will be commoditized. Knowledge will be commoditized. All of us will be smarter. All of us will have expanded memory. All of us. Bullshit. Because if it's commoditized, that means it ain't free. That means that the World Wide Web, open knowledge, you will have to pay for it. So if you don't have money, you don't get the knowledge, whereby then you're not able to continue to compete. This is the great race. Control of the internet and control of the mind to then dictate and determine winners and losers at every metric, at every scale, at every juncture, at every intersection of society.
It will be unheard of. We will no longer be this isolated human being. We will be connected to everything. So, you can imagine not only will we be able to get knowledge, but we can actually have full experiences in our head. So right now we have these clunky VR units that we have to put on. But in the future, you can just download a whole environment and actually live in it. And all of you might think, this is not real. But do you know every night when you dream, those dreams are real? No matter how fantastic your dreams are, they are real. You feel like you're really there. Our brains have that capability already built in. All it takes is the technology to stimulate and transfer the right images in our brain so our brain creates them, and then we will live like the difference between us dreaming and reality will be blurred. We will be spending a lot of time outside our bodies. So,
you ever wonder why the world is being made ugly? Why over the last 60 to 100 years there's been this push to darken, pervert, disrupt, pollute the real world? How incentivizing is it going to be for people who are poor, that have no future in the real world, to be offered active, controlled hallucinations in order to have a simulated experience of a better life, which in reality is only another step along the journey into this whole upload your consciousness into the cloud thing and sacrifice your body. So there's a lot more, in my view, going on with this epic struggle that we're watching unfold before our eyes. And if it's not done properly, then in my view, the species is going to be irrevocably changed, whereby we won't have the ability to fight back. We won't have the ability to change our future. It will be dictated for us going forward, generations going forward. So those of us alive today, those of us able-bodied today, those of us of sound mind today, are deciding the future and fate of the species. Because the final frontier at this point is the human mind.
think about this. You, as a human being right now, are trapped in this body. But once you are connected to the internet, you are no longer trapped in your body. You can actually be anywhere at any time that any other person or any other device is getting sensory information. So there could be a robot on Mars, and you could literally tap into the robot on Mars, and it would be like you're on Mars. It could totally recreate the experience, including the sensations, the physical sensations, like everything of you being on Mars. You can live through other people, your favorite pop star, your favorite scientist. You could be in Elon Musk's head right now, walking around doing what he's doing, if Elon Musk allowed you to do that. It gets so strange because our senses now, we have our 5 senses of our body. But suddenly, if we are connected to a world of intelligent machines and intelligent sensors all over, we will no longer have 5 senses. We will have access to hundreds of sensory input, infrared, right? All these UV, all these different types of senses that we never even experienced before. It will radically change how we perceive existence.
So ask yourself this. If they're disclosing that this is our future and implying earlier that it's approximately 10 years away, whereby this will start picking up speed, how far along is this technology in real life, in reality? What they're referring to when they're giving you these timeline projections is the projected amount of time it's going to take to mainstream, normalize, monetize, manufacture, and distribute technologies whereby they can collect revenue And if they are that far along, ready to do those things, don't you think this has already been done? Why else would they be funding people like Dr. Lieber to infuse nanotech into neurons so that they can connect soldiers to AI? Because the EEG headset might fall off, because those sensors might get dirty with sweat or whatever. And if you put that stuff directly in the brain, so long as the person is alive and doesn't experience some sort of traumatic brain injury, concussion, etc., you pretty much have a really robust system to communicate with. What I'm getting at is this technology's been done, in my opinion. And this is just the public rollout so that we pay for the networks that are ultimately going to be set up to provide us with a renaissance or provide us with chains.
So if you start to go down this path, you see, we won't even be, our life today will be totally alien to us. We will be living in a whole nother reality that is blending information, sensory information, data information, memories, all of this from all around the world in this vast internet. And that will and can happen. So let's go even further. Experiencing other lives. So all of us experience things in our life, but now we will be able to have many lives. You can have many lives because you can access other people in other places and live through them. And if you want to think about this, it can be almost like heaven. Why do I say this? Because if you study every major religion in the world, every religion, Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, what those religions promise us is that we will escape our bodies in the future. We will go to some heaven or nirvana or a state of non-being or a state of inclusiveness with everybody. No longer will we and our consciousness be confined to our bodies as an individual. In fact, if you look at us right now as a human being, if I feel pain, if I'm in pain, nobody else can feel the pain I feel. If you're in pain, I can't feel your pain. I can feel sorry for you, I can empathize with you, but I cannot feel your pain. But in this world, we will actually be able to feel the emotions of other people. You can actually not just transfer data and sensory information, but emotions.
Do you remember the discussion we had about human bond communication and the idea of feeling identification transmission that was showcased by Huawei to European telecoms and others at their 2017 conference in London? This was a few shows ago, where they were talking or demonstrating in their PDF, in their corporate document, utilizing human bond communication type technologies, being able to transmit emotion over the internet. And that being a stepping stone to ultimately being able to transmit all five senses, which is the human bond communication platform, transmitting all five senses over the internet, capturing them out of the body, reading them out of the body, digitizing them, sending the five senses in a digital format over the internet, just like any other information is sent today, and then putting it into somebody else's brain and nervous system to do exactly what this guy is talking about. We're here, folks. You're alive when this is going down.
I would know your pain, you would know our pain, and human beings would never be alone. So, we will come to a point where we, as gods, like gods, will be creating our own reality. We will be redefining what the human experience is for the first time in history. This can happen, and it will happen, but what we want to think about is this. Technology is really powerful. The internet, being connected, is really powerful, but we've already seen in a very primitive way, just with our cell phones, these primitive devices, how it can totally change our life. Like all of our lives are changed by WeChat. All of our lives are changed by the internet. Well, we are embarking on a path now where we will become the internet. The internet will become us. They will be inseparable. We'll have our storage and everything else all over the place. And when we do that, we have to understand that this is a big responsibility. It's something we as a society, we as the human race, must think about very, very carefully. Because imagine, people can hack your cell phone now. People can hack your computer, and it can be bad. They can steal your banking information, take all your money. They can steal your identity, but they can't really hurt you. In the future, though, if somebody hacks into your head because it's connected to the internet, they can steal you.
What does it mean to wish for death but not be able to die? What does it mean to be conscious but not have control? What is the great delusion? We are here now. This is happening now. So we either do something now, or we literally are going to become the movie. And we are going to be watching that very same movie rather than making our own choices. We will be watching those choices being made and acted out through us, using our bodies, using our brains as remote computer nodes on a network that are governed and dictated with the utilization of cognitive, aware networks governed and run by AI, programmed by a very, very few. What does the beast system mechanically look like? How many different facets are needed in order for it to become a tangible, three-dimensional, working apparatus? And then what do those pieces look like? Conversely, if we make it through this test, these technologies will enable the species to do some very amazing things. The eye is not seen and the ear is not heard. The plans that I have for you. But it's a free will world. And what we're talking about here is a discussion, a debate, or a battle over free will, over the mind of man, the mind of human. And whoever wins is going to control the future.
They could actually steal you. They can implant memories in your head that you don't have. They could erase memories. They could control you in ways that you wouldn't even know you're being controlled. Is this scary? So I painted on the hand heaven, but there is also a hell, right? This is heaven and hell. We are on the cusp of this technology that is so powerful and has the potential to so radically transform our lives and our existence, and we have to be very careful about how we do this. We don't want people controlling us. So think about this. Think very carefully. Everybody in this room are very smart people. You're all highly educated. We are going to be making these decisions that lay the groundwork for this technology in our lifetime. And those decisions will affect the rest of humanity more than any decisions we have made in the past. So I wanted to thank you. I am the author also of this book, Making Elephants Fly.
So let's look at another visual representation of what this looks like. This is Anna Avatar. This is a visual representation of telemedicine, remote connections, remote presence, hence the name Avatar. So I'm personally speechless because the implications are they're just, it doesn't get any better, it doesn't get any worse. We are literally standing at a fork in the road. The entire species is standing at a fork in the road. It doesn't matter if you're an American or somewhere in Europe, somewhere in China, it doesn't matter. So, X Prize, Peter Diamandis, anywhere as possible, and this is the Anna Avatar Prize, whereby they incentivize people to come up with avatar-type technologies, which requires interacting with the human organism.
had internet, we had iPhones, now we'll have avatars.
The ANA Avatar X Prize is a $10 million competition that challenges teams to develop a physical robotic avatar system that can transport your senses, actions, and presence to a remote location in real time and feel as if you're actually there.
We'll be able to completely break through all of the barriers of distance, time, and cultures that exist in our world. I think that will allow us to unleash the full potential of humanity for the very first time.
We are at the exact right time to bring different technologies together to make something that the first roboticists didn't think about, this human-to-human connection.
To connect with loved ones, maybe that you're not able to see often, to be able to transport skills. So doctors and teachers are able to use their expertise anywhere in the world instantaneously. You may be able to go into space or go into a disaster relief situation where you can send an avatar and not risk human life. The number of opportunities are endless.
What I'm expecting is to be able to sense the breeze, the smell, and interact with the remote environment.
Scoop sand in the tropics, you feel the grains running through your fingers from Central Europe. Shake hands with someone in Tokyo, and you feel the firmness of that handshake in Los Angeles. It will enable people everywhere to experience our world in a way that they wouldn't have before.
By creating remote and collaborative telepresence activities, will change the way we live and work together.
77 qualified teams from 19 countries have been selected to move forward to the next stage of the competition. These teams now have the opportunity to advance to the semifinals in 2021, where they will demonstrate their avatars' capabilities to enter the finals in 2022. Time is limited. The clock is ticking. In order to be successful, you're going to have to be ahead of the curve in developing these avatar technologies.
I am just thrilled to see how many teams are so passionate about what they're doing. They all have a dream, they all have a vision, and they're willing to work on something that is going to make an impact on humanity that we can't even measure today.
Right now, opportunity and access is not equal around the world. And this prize and this technology will erase that. Every aspect of our lives will be touched in a greater way than the smartphone has touched our lives.
I think by the time we're at the end of the 20s, we'll see the use of avatars as being something integrated into many people's normal lives.
The experience of teleporting yourself into an avatar halfway across the world will be something that will be really amazing.
It's going to rewrite the way we exist as human beings, and it's going to rewrite the way we connect across the globe. So I think this prize will be looked at as the beginnings of a massive change in our society for the good.
So let me ask you a question. If you don't have a job, nowhere to work, you have a family, but you were offered the opportunity to be an avatar for someone else. All the robots you saw in there in that video, them building robots and this scientific techie crap. What they're not showing you is that you could very likely be the avatar. And conversely, if that's too much for you, just bear in mind that cloning is a very real thing. Growing in a laboratory environment, synthetic life, animals, up to and including potentially humans, to be put on the network from day one to function as avatars. Only they're flesh and blood. And they're dialed in from day one. And when you look at Project Monarch and MK Ultra and all of these ideas and these concepts and take them to their infinitum, to their finality, to their totality, it really boils down to those three options. Somebody's brain, their consciousness, transported into a robot, transported into another sentient human and overriding that sentient human. So that sentient human, it then becomes someone else's avatar. Or the third, you grow them. They never really have total consciousness because you got them all wired up and ready to go before you cut them loose. And they become flesh and blood, walking around, looking, smelling, tasting, functioning just like a human, only they're not. They are being remotely piloted. By the end of the 20s, they said. That would be like the 2020s. Peter Diamandis, founder. The Ana Avatar X Prize can enable the creation of an audacious alternative that could bypass physical human limitations, allowing us to more rapidly and efficiently distribute skills and hands-on expertise to distant geographic locations where they are needed, bridging the gap between distance, time, and cultures. So, January 24th, 2019, ANA Advisory Board announcement. Talk about their launch in 2018. This is a relatively new endeavor. Pursuing partnership, development opportunities, conducting research workshops, participating in industry events, blah, blah, blah. And here's the board members. It's in the show notes. We're not going to go through them. I haven't researched them individually. Nonetheless, 77 teams worldwide advance in the $10 million prize on an Avatar X Prize competition. This was January 8th, 2020. There's a lot of money being thrown at a $10 million prize. When you think about the amount of money being invested between 77 teams who have advanced, meaning there were more to start with, to get $10 million, the amount of money being thrown at this is a lot more than $10 million. And just because you don't win doesn't mean you're not going to make money going through this development process. Because there are all kinds of investors, philanthropists, governments, etc., that are going to be looking at the fruits of these 77 teams. And that's why it's worth it to them to spend more than $10 million collectively to compete, because the prize is much more than 10 million. So it says here, independent panel of judges, blah, 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 and they're from all over the world. This is a global endeavor. And you want to talk about technology transfer. What better way to do it than create a technological Olympics that has one specific goal in mind? An X Prize has many different prizes. But when people come together and collaborate and share knowledge and expertise, et cetera, they're pulling from people that would qualify to work on projects for places like DARPA and other similar affiliates, other similar type organizations in other countries. That's the caliber of people. It's a very, very interesting dynamic. Let's continue. April 8th, 2020, X Prize taps visionary sci-fi writers to imagine the future of telepresence technologies. So this is going to result in propaganda. You could call it propaganda, but what you could also call it is advertisement or cinema or whatever, to normalize these kinds of things, which will then incentivize investment and induce the public to consume it. And what I mean by the public, I'm talking militaries, governments, corporations, and ultimately the public for initially entertainment and for education. So anyway, let's start looking at some of these technologies. So this is a patent from Saturn Licensing, LLC. It's back in 2004. Scanning method for applying ultrasonic acoustic data to the human neural cortex. And what I want to preface these patent reviews with is, just because we're looking at ultrasound in this case doesn't mean it's not possible with any other type of stimuli. What I want you to keep in your mind is, through the course of the use of this technology, through the study of this technology, it is the neural circuits, it is the brain regions, it is the manipulation of the brain and the nervous system that will be cataloged, categorized, reproduced, and baselines and normalizations created so that other stimulation techniques are also more efficient and can be applied more effectively to achieve the same results in perhaps a more user-friendly, more non-invasive, or a more inexpensive way. So we're going to start with this picture over here, and it's because it kind of gives you an idea of what phased array looks like. And what this really talks about is applying an energy pattern. And in this case, a pattern begins with an array of points on the visual cortex. The acoustic pattern is shaped to expand in a radius around each of these points. Only the tissue along the edge of each radius is affected at any moment. So they're creating rings of energy. It's not just a rod of energy, it's a ring of energy, right? Varying the signal at each point along the radius as it expands produces neural firing rate differences in the neural tissue, so they can change the characteristics of the energy that's being applied to the brain. And notice that there are many different applications all at the same time in order to get very specific responses from the brain, in this case, the visual cortex. When the radii expand to where they begin to touch, the pattern changes to fill in the areas between the original point arrays. So what you're looking at here is overlapping rings that also create unique energy characteristics being applied to the brain. New radii are centered about these points between the original stimulation locations, and the signal contracts about these new centers. So what you're seeing here is our rays, or rings, if you will, that are simultaneously applied to a part of the brain. They overlap and then they change and morph into different positions or shapes. And this real time, think of it like something breathing, an inhalation and exhalation, where these rings are expanding and collapsing. And as they're expanding and collapsing, the rings overlap and intersect, and they create unique features, unique stimuli. And as they're going through these gyrations, expanding and contracting, these rings move around ever so slightly, and they're all independently controlled, whereby you can create the most precise stimulation possible in the motor cortex, visual cortex, whatever, any part of the brain you want. Let's read about what this can do. A method for creating a sensory experience operates by scanning acoustic signals across the human neural cortex to create the desired sensory perceptions. The acoustic signal is scanned into a predetermined path. The pattern is then modified to fill in the spaces in a predetermined pattern so that over a short time period, the desired signal is scanned across the intended region of the neural cortex of the brain. In one example, the pattern begins with an array of points on the cortex. Thus, an acoustic signal in an array of points is directed towards the cortex, part of your brain. The acoustic pattern is then shaped to expand in radius around each of the points. Thus, the acoustic signal scans the visual cortex in an array of expanding circles, varying the signal at each point along the radius as it expands to produce neural firing differences in the neural tissue, being able to selectively activate the independent regions of your brain or subregions of a region of your brain. When the circles expand to where they begin to touch, the pattern changes fill in the area between the original arrays of points. The new circles are centered about the points between the original stimulation locations. The acoustic signal contracts about these new centers. The signal continues to contract about the new center points. When the new circles have contracted to an array of points, the process can be repeated from start or simply reversed. Another method operates by forming concentric circles and expanding and contracting each of the concentric circles to fill in the original spaces between the concentric circles, expanding and contracting many different circles, moving them around ever so gently to stimulate and massage the brain with sound. In this case, I'll show you another patent where it talks about using radio frequencies, electromagnetic waves, and also by using temperature. And when we learn about the thermoacoustic effect, some of you have already been exposed to that. That's the voice-to-skull technology, the silent subliminal communication patented by the Air Force, whereby microwaves are applied to the brain and it rapidly expands and cools the tissue, heats and cools the tissue. It heats up, it expands, cools down, the tissue contracts, and it modulates the brain using temperature to create audible sound and intelligible speech for silent covert communication. It's thermoacoustics. They use thermoacoustics for modern sonography. Same thing that they use to look at a baby, where they use microwaves to create thermal expansion of tissue or water in the body, and they use ultrasound receivers to measure the acoustic waves that are created by the thermoacoustic effect, which can be induced with ultrasound, light, or electromagnetic waves. All of those mechanisms are possible with this technology. The question is, how sophisticated is the software? How sophisticated are the algorithms? How sophisticated are the delivery mechanisms? We're talking about generating sensory experiences, your senses, all five senses: see, touch, taste, hear, smell. Conventional technique for generating neural activity in the human nervous system requires surgical implants the conventional way, right? The implants may comprise electronic connections and wires that cause electronic impulses to interact with some portion of the human nervous system, such as the human neural cortex, and thereby cause neural activity in the human neural cortex. Researchers have successfully mapped audio sensory data to the cochlear channel and visual data to the visual cortex. Conventional invasive techniques have several drawbacks. Surgical implants may cause patient trauma and medical complications during and or after surgery. Second, additional or ongoing surgery may be required, particularly if new technology is developed. The present invention is therefore directed to a method for generating sensory experiences using non-invasive techniques. The present invention solves the foregoing drawbacks by providing a non-invasive system and process for generating or projecting sensory data, visual, audio, taste, smell, or touch, within onto the human neural cortex. Moreover, the present invention provides a non-invasive system and process that uses acoustic signals to generate sensory data. For example, visual, audio, taste, smell, or touch, within onto the human neural cortex. The system forms acoustic signals from externally supplied neural timing difference data, software algorithms driving the equipment that's ultimately applying the acoustic information to your brain, ultrasound. The system forms acoustic signals from externally supplied neural timing difference data. For example, imagery captured from a video camera can be converted into neural timing difference data. An acoustic signal is then created to replicate these neural timing differences in the human cortex. Pulsed ultrasonic signals modify the firing rate of your brain. Controlled use of this pulsed data through ultrasonic holography allows neural timing differences to be placed into the cortex, meaning they provide you with a hallucination. Sensory experiences arise from differences in the neural firing times. So they map your brain, they understand what the EEG pattern looks like, they figure out how to stimulate the tissue in your brain to artificially recreate the EEG pattern that your brain understands as looking at a flower. And not only looking at a flower, but a particular type of flower, let's say a rose. And not only understanding that it's a rose, but then understanding how many petals it has and what color it is and how red the rose is or how yellow the rose is, or if the rose has any blemishes on it, or if there are thorns on the stem of the rose, or if there are leaves on the stem of the rose. Is the rose in a vase with other roses? Does it have rosemary? Does it have baby's breath? If there's a vase, what's the vase look like? Is there water in the vase? All of those things can be established and determined through measurement of the brain, capturing the unique brainwave signature after recording those brainwave patterns while looking at those images, and then reapplying them to the brain with light, sound, or electromagnetic waves to recreate that picture in your mind, thereby inducing a hallucination. And we're just talking about a picture. Imagine when they can do this with motion picture, a video. What is that going to look like? It talks about using a transducer array, a secondary transducer array. So these are the mechanical components needed to focus and modulate energy onto the neural cortex. And says here, an advantage of the present system is that no invasive surgery is needed to assist a person, such as a blind person, to view live and or recorded images or to hear sounds. One advantage of the system is its adaptability to each individual user. Human brains have some similarities, but they may vary in size, shape, and number of convolutions, etc. The present system comprises components that may be calibrated, and a library of signals may be customized for each individual user. The system is advantageously configured to allow vision impaired and or hearing impaired users to experience at least some visual and auditory sensations. So it talks about the mechanics of it, being able to produce low frequency pulsing, controlling the phase difference between the emitted energy of the primary and secondary transducer array elements. Ultrasonic signals are pulsed at low frequencies, and it affects the firing of your brain. So, it says here, a method of customizing a library of data related to the signals configured to alter neural firing times in the brain. It talks about being able to retrieve this data related to the appropriate acoustic signals needed to make things appear in your brain or to sound like something in your brain. And this is all with no invasiveness. You don't go past the skin. So let's look at the next one. This is from Sony, oh so familiar brand, Sony. Non-invasive system and process for converting sensory data, visual, audio, taste, smell, or touch, into neural firing timing differences in the human brain using acoustic signals to generate neural firing time differences. It says that the appropriate signals can be stored into memory. The user's response map may be used to more accurately map the calculated neural firing time differences to the correct neural locations. So it's another example. It's just to illustrate to you that this is being studied and perfected, and methods and procedures are being patented by a wide array of people or individuals or entities. So we will continue. Brain-to-brain interface system applied to a single brain. I have some notes over here that, yeah. So we're going to go down to section 88. Before we do, I'll show you this. They're showing you apparatuses here, right? Brain stimulation device. And what it's doing is it's able to focus with these transducers, able to focus the energy to certain portions of the brain in order to stimulate the brain in a specific kind of way to get the brain to understand things like images, sounds, smells, those types of things, and or to correct behavior. And here's an array, right? Same kind of thing, only this array, what they're showing you in this array is it has many different independently operated devices that can send their own energy source into the brain. And so if you think to yourself, okay, great, as long as I don't have one of these next to my head, fine. But just remember what I said earlier. Once this stuff is mapped and understood, how long before the methods, procedures, techniques become easy to implement with things like the introduction of nanotechnology, or with things like complex phased array beamforming from electromagnetic waves, being able to resonate specific parts of the brain? And I can show you that if we have time. But what I want to illustrate to you is that Japan, the United States, Korea, and others are all actively engaged in being able to generate and apply synthetic stimuli to a human to recreate all 5 senses. And so we'll go down to 88 because that's what I had marked out. And we will begin to read what this says. Computer sets a coordinate of a target area, focus position, to be stimulated by the brain stimulation device to allow the brain stimulation device to accurately stimulate a particular area. The coordinates of a target area may be set based on a known brain map and may be set based on a brain map unique to the target brain, constructed through precise examination of the target brain. And you ask yourself, how is that possible today if I don't go to the doctor? And I submit to you these radar technology applications and this radar tech in general that we've been looking at over the last few episodes has everything to do with being able to map your brain. If they can map down to 0.001 centimeter and extract your speech, recreating or analyzing the subtle muscle movements of multiple locations just in your mouth and your throat to recreate your speech, accuracy greater than 95%, greater than 99% for some of the measurements and or recreated speech patterns, being able to understand subtle muscle movements down to 0.001 centimeter, which is 10,000 nanometers or 10 microns. Do you think that they're able to image and understand the different regions of your brain? Especially if we can look at Google patents, for example, when we look at their SOLI and their gesture recognition patents, whereby they discuss being able to understand and distinguish between bone, cartilage, blood, different types of muscles, and being able to map and understand down to 2 millimeters in order to understand subtle gesture recognition movements like dragging your finger, one finger across another. Do you really think that it stops with your hands or your arms? When the real prize is what's going on from the neck up. A device which stimulates brain cells through the magnetic field or electric current may be used as a brain stimulation device. While the use of an ultrasound stimulation device is capable of focusing, low intensity ultrasound can accurately focus on specific brain areas to selectively deliver local stimulation to the corresponding area. So this is critical. They tell you here, but they don't really tell you here. And what they're really getting at is a difference in resolution. And they're telling you that the brain can be stimulated with a magnetic field or an electric current. Then that those devices or whatever devices emit magnetic fields or electric currents may be used as a brain stimulation device. And it says here that ultrasound stimulation device is capable of focusing low intensity ultrasound, which just means that it's ultrasound that doesn't have enough energy to literally fissure your brain cells, to explode or rupture your brain cells, or to act as a scalpel inside your brain. High intensity ultrasound does that. They use it for things like cancer treatments. Low intensity ultrasound just excites the cells through mechanical action and or through changes in temperature. So ultrasound can go in and vibrate, activating the mechanoreceptors, or it can go in and it can heat up tissue and it can activate the thermoreceptors. The same thing can be done with electromagnetic energy applied to the brain. The same thing can be done with focused light applied to the brain. It's just a matter of what the resolution is. And once everything's been mapped out, it's infinitely easier to apply coarser energy delivery mechanisms. So let's say electromagnetic energy is not as focused ultrasound. Well, if they know exactly where they need to stimulate because you've been mapped, now it's a whole lot easier to use a less precise instrument because you already have the roadmap. Anyway, the ultrasound stimulation, if pulsed, electric signals applied as input to an ultrasound stimulator. So what they're talking about is using pulsed electrical signals to turn on and turn off the ultrasound, thereby modulating the ultrasound. It's possible to stimulate an area of at least part of the brain to activate or inactivate, turn on or turn off brain cells. It is known that the low intensity focused ultrasound stimulation, according to an embodiment of the present disclosure, purely transmit mechanical energy, mechanoreceptors, without any heat generation, and acts on the ion channels involved in neurotransmission or gets involved in neuromodulation through changes in membrane capacitance. So those of you that are around when we went over all the genetic manipulation stuff, we were looking at things like sonogenetics and mechanogenetics, where we looked at these ion channels that are on the outside of electrogenic cells, neurons, and these ion channels respond to pressure. These ion channels respond to temperature. And what they're talking about here is using ultrasound to stimulate the ion channels that respond to pressure or torque or vibration and or respond to a change in heat. And when those ion channels are activated, they generate an electrical charge that then fires the neuron or turns the neuron off. That's what they're talking about here. There are many different ways to access neural cells. It's not just done with electricity. So we'll continue. Method and system for direct communication. This is an American company. William J. Tyler came from Arizona State University. He holds many, many, many patents as it relates to manipulating the brain. And what I want to show you here is this idea of turning on and turning off energy In this case, it's ultrasound. He holds patents for transcranial electrical stimulation using electric fields as well to do the same thing. Ultrasound pressure, ultrasound period, pulse length, pulse repetition period, the waveform duration. So you have all of these things that are itemized. How long is it on? How long is it off? How long is a complete cycle of on and off before you start the cycle over again, back on? What is the total duration of the treatment of on and off? That's what they're talking about here with this visual description, where everything about the stimulation is quantified so that everything about the stimulation and the results of the stimulation can be cataloged and documented so that you can understand exactly what specific stimuli is required to generate things like a pinch or a tickle or a certain type of smell or a certain visual response or a certain taste response. Because that's what we're talking about here, providing artificial stimulation to the human organism, thereby mimicking the five senses. To override your own impulses, but they're allocated in these patents as medical devices to help those that have diseases. Just keep in mind what we watched earlier. And keep in mind the discussion about human bond communication that we had weeks ago at this point, whereby they are going to be delivering these services as entertainment and or as opportunities for learning and or as safer ways to do dangerous jobs, whereby artificial stimuli is applied to the human organism to recreate the environment as if you were actually there, only you're not. Let's see what notes I have on this one. 122 and 128 to 131. So we'll go down and look at 122. And 122 talks about, in another embodiment for content generation, a device and system are used to automatically detect brain signals. We're talking about a closed feedback system. So you can apply stimuli, but then you have to be able to read what's happening in order to be able to correct, continue, or stop the stimuli. Devices and systems are used to automatically detect brain signals or other physiological measurements in order to generate a message. Physiological measurements may include electromyogram, galvanic skin response, heart rate, blood pressure, respiration rate, pupil dilation, eye movement, gaze direction, or other physiological measurement. Now, some of these terms should be familiar to you because these are the things that the marketing companies look at to understand your emotional physiological responses to stimuli when you're watching things like TV, looking at an advertisement, or perhaps going about your day interacting with people, places, and things, including loved ones. The same devices, or I should say the same techniques, are used to create the loop whereby a stimuli is provided. These types of autonomic responses are measured to understand what that stimuli is doing to you. Things like watches and headphones have the sensors necessary. So do radar fields. The Google Soli radar patents, gesture recognition patents, micro impulse radar patents that have to do with ultra wideband, which are now being deployed in mobile devices, which can be deployed through modern wireless networks, including Wi-Fi, because they're operating at frequencies that allow for wideband sensing to occur, and they will be rolled out as being able to offer and provide wideband communications in licensed spectrum. But they also can do things like understand your temperature, understand your respiration, understand your heartbeat, understand changes in all of these things, being able to know you better than you without any contact to your body. So Now we're going to go look at, I believe it was 122, if I'm not mistaken. No, it was 128. So we'll go down and read what this patent talks about. This is also an ultrasound patent from an American group. Brain stimulation to communicate realistic virtual experiences. Brain stimulation can be used to communicate realistic virtual experiences. Communication is limited by its form and may be incapable of reproducing a particular subjective cognitive state or perception. For instance, a written description of the smell of freshly baked cookies cannot fully reproduce the subjective experience of smelling fresh cookies themselves. The communication of a particular subjective experience can be induced or triggered by activating neuronal circuits in similar patterns as would occur for the experience itself. BioTU, they're talking about targeted ultrasound, is particularly well suited to this application due to its capacity for targeting, as well as the possibility of using multiple transducers in an array to create a complex space and time pattern of neuromodulation. Beneficial embodiments would target one or more brain regions that mediate sensory experience, motor performance, that's your muscles and your skeletal system, and the formation of ideas and thoughts, as well as states of emotion, physiological arousal, sexual arousal, attention, creativity, relaxation, empathy, connectedness, and other cognitive states. Focused energy using phased array transducers are able to create artificial sensory experiences, manipulate your motor function, form thoughts and ideas in your brain, create artificial induced states of emotions, create different types of physiological arousal, including sexual arousal, impact your ability to have focused attention, for better or worse, as they say, creativity, relaxation, empathy, a feeling of connectedness, or other cognitive states. Now, how would this be useful for an election, for example? If I felt empathetic towards some idea or some category or some topic that was being discussed in order to determine who the appropriate leader is going to be. What if they could artificially induce empathy? What if they could artificially induce the way in which I feel, the connectedness? How well do I connect to this person? Do I get them? Do they get me? Are we on the same wavelength? To achieve a suitably realistic virtual subjective experience, delivering BioTU, talking about ultrasound in this case, not exclusive, but in this case, we're talking about ultrasound, to modulate neuronal activity underlying multiple sensory domains and or cognitive states at the same time or in close proximity of time would be beneficial. So what they're talking about is literally playing the piano that is your brain, where they simultaneously or in very, very close proximity relative to time, being able to stimulate something visual, something audio, and an emotion. Something visual, something audio, and emotion, and maybe making you feel horny. Moreover, an additional beneficial embodiment of a device for virtual subjective experience, virtual reality, would include devices or system to record the brain state of an individual in order to recreate that subjective experience in that individual or into another individual at a later time or at the same time. What does virtual reality mean to you? Communicating virtual subjective experiences with ultrasound would be desired for a wide variety of subjective experiences. An individual may wish to re-experience a significant moment in his or her life, such as the birth of a child or when receiving an award. Alternatively, an individual may wish to recreate the subjective experience of youthful exuberance or contented wisdom from another time in their lives. In some embodiments, a virtual subjective experience would be advantageous for psychiatric, behavioral, or occupational therapy. By briefly creating a controlled alternative subjective experience, the subject could benefit by learning how to control their own brain states to achieve a similar therapeutic effect. So now we're talking about rewiring the brain so that a stimuli would allow an individual to create their own subjective experience. What does that sound like? Sounds a little Manchurian Candidate-y to me. Sounds a little MK Ultra-y to me. Subject could benefit by learning how to control their own brain states to achieve a similar therapeutic effect. Similar, albeit simpler techniques have been used to provide biofeedback to patients with chronic pain regarding the activation of a pain processing brain region in the rostral anterior cingulate cortex. Embodiments of a virtual subjective experience created with ultrasound neuromodulation would also benefit for generating new experiences for an individual, for entertainment, training, or other purpose. Virtual subjective experiences would provide a high level of immersiveness for gaming, movie, or theme park applications. In addition, another embodiment, individuals may be entertained by the subjective experience of climbing Mount Everest, dunking a basketball like LeBron James, receiving a raucous standing ovation as a musician, or innumerable other interesting or entertaining experiences. Let your mind wander with that one. If all five senses can be artificially recreated. Ooh, ah, baby, ooh, ah. In other embodiments, virtual subjective experiences may be designed for training purposes, such as for training soldiers, firefighters, or trauma surgeons for situations that would be otherwise difficult or dangerous to create or reproduce. Another embodiment, one individual communicates one or more aspects of their subjective experience to a friend, a loved one, doctor, psychiatrist, or coach, such that the recipient may better understand their feelings, thoughts, or subjective experiences. What does that look like? That means that somebody else logs into your brain. That means that somebody else gets the same experience that you're having so they can better understand what you're going through. Remote contact, remote communication, remote intimacy. All right. So it talks about the different kinds of things that could be used. Talks about being able to use infrared sensitive cameras to be able to convert those images into the brain. This is what this guy was talking about, folks. The hyper excited dude who was talking to a group in Asia. Using sensors and then converting those sensor inputs into impulses into the brain so the brain understands what's going on. We are rapidly running out of time. This is one from Stanford University doing the same thing. And I think we're gonna move forward because we have 15 minutes left. Yeah, just talks about various aspects of the present invention are directed in addressing the above issues, which are basically difficult, invasive techniques. Present invention is directed to methods and devices and systems that are used to modify neural transmission patterns between different structures or regions in the brain. Talks about using sound waves. Same general thing. Talks about using, I'm glad we didn't skip this one because here it actually talks about using radio frequency. The present invention is believed to be useful for enabling practical applications of variety types of these systems. The invention has been found to be particularly suited for use in systems and methods dealing with generating this LTP, LTD, which are abbreviations that are listed above in the patent, which affect in neural circuits. They affect neural circuits through the use of sound waves, which may include high-intensity focused ultrasound, comma, radio frequency transmissions, comma, electrical currents, comma, magnetic fields, or ionizing radiation. So what they're illustrating here is that all of these methods are capable of targeting regions of the brain, stimulating regions of the brain. Methods involve producing and directing sound waves or radio frequency transmission towards a first targeted neural structure, controlling the characteristics of the sound waves or the radio frequency transmissions at the first target neural structure with respect to the characteristics of the sound waves or the radio frequency transmissions at the second targeted neural structure, and thereby modifying neural transmission patterns. So what does that mean? That means that they can take sound waves or radio frequency transmissions, electromagnetic waves. They can stimulate one area of the brain, stimulate another area of the brain, and make necessary adjustments between one or both or more regions of the brain simultaneously to get specific neural circuits to fire, to induce artificial stimuli, sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. And devices and methods for modulating brain activity. I brought this up just to show you that here is sound or electromagnetic energy in a laboratory device or something like a fighter pilot's helmet or a soldier's protective helmet that could be used to basically replace radio communications, to artificially induce motor skills, to artificially keep somebody awake when they're functioning in the middle of the night after running all day and you can't sleep yet because you're in the middle of doing something, whereby power systems are integrated into your load-bearing vest or applied remotely via satellite or drone to then power these stimulators that are worn as a helmet. But we're past that because we looked at the project that Charles Lieber was working with the Air Force on, whereby these transducers are now nanotech that are inserted directly into the cells in the brain and can do the very same things with nanotech. Brain communication and remote control. We will go over these in more detail. We are almost out of time. Apparatus and method for remote monitoring and altering of brain waves. This was back in 1974, folks. Brains can be continuously monitored. Seizures, sleepiness, and dreaming can be detected. Bodily functions such as pulse rate, heartbeat, regularity, and others can be monitored. Hallucinations can be detected. Medical diagnosis of patients inaccessible to physicians from remote stations. A profile of the entire brainwave emission pattern may be monitored, or select areas of the brain may be observed in a single measurement by applying a different angle to the direction of the antennas. We're talking about electromagnetic radiation manipulating and or monitoring your brain. There is no physical contact between the subject and the monitoring apparatus. Transmission to the brain can alter the natural brain waves in a desired fashion. The closed loop compensating system, because they can read and write to the brain with the electromagnetic waves at distance away from your body, Back in 1974, it was patented. Permits instantaneous and continuous modification of brainwave response patterns. Electromagnetic signals of different frequencies are simultaneously transmitted to the brain. The signals interfere with one another to yield a waveform that is modulated by your own brain. The waveform is then displayed for visual viewing and or routed to a computer for processing and analysis. Can be used to produce a different signal, which can be transmitted back into the brain to create a change in the electrical activity in your brain. This patent talks about a communication system for your brain. Basically mapping your unique brain waves, putting them in a database so that they can translate it to somebody else's unique brain waves in order to allow for an exchange of information or feelings or anything else. It can suppress appetite. It can stimulate appetite, control your thirst, provide advanced communication techniques up to and including thoughts and or feelings. And this was patented this was filed in 1998, patent awarded, publication of it was in 2000. Method of detecting human microwave electromagnetic brain activity. This is a Russian patent, and it talks about using 1.5 gigahertz to 5 gigahertz. Well, now that's cell phone frequencies, and that's old school Wi-Fi, 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. To map the brain activity of a person. Applications of this invention for both peaceful and military purposes. All of them can be created in the near future using the method of this invention. Analysis of microwave bioelectric activity of the brain under normal and pathological conditions are able to diagnose a number of functional and emotional states of the brain: depression, aggression, emotional instability, mental disorders, and mental diseases. For example, military, medical, social, clinical, social, and labor. So you are examining these organizations basically are able to examine your brain. This is Russia, mind you, that wrote this patent. For neurological and neurosurgical practice, for military medicine and disaster medicine. And it gets better. This one talks about sensing and modulating your brain. US holds a patent for this one. Japan has a patent for this one. There's a world patent for it. China has a patent. Taiwan has a patent, and it talks about being able to do the same thing, using electromagnetic waves to detect, image, and monitor your breathing rate, your heart rate, being able to be used for a brain-machine interface, direct communication with the brain, can sense brain activities, methods of neural modulation using radio frequency electromagnetic waves, meaning they can change your brainwave characteristics. It says they can selectively apply to a targeted brain site, having frequencies that are specific, that are the most sensitive to the targeted brain site. So what they're talking about is each of the brain sites resonate a little bit differently. And if they understand and they mapped your brain, they know what unique modulated waveforms and what frequencies need to be applied to the brain to excite one region versus another. And they can do this very, very quickly and stimulate more than one at a time. And so these technologies or these pads that we've been looking at with ultrasound that may require devices right next to the brain, right next to the head, these things have been done already with electromagnetic energy. Can be done at distance because your brain have unique resonance characteristics. The different regions of your brain have unique resonant characteristics. And so if you can stimulate them in the right sequence at the right time, you can then activate those neural circuits they were talking about to generate artificial stimuli, up to and including all five senses, up to and including creating thoughts and ideas, artificial thoughts, ideas, and images in the brain, meaning active controlled hallucinations. Five minutes left. Mind controlled drones and robots, how thought reading tech will change the face of warfare. July 28th, 2020, DARPA is funding a number of brain-computer interface projects to enable soldiers to control equipment at the speed of thought. For years, researchers have been exploring the potential for brain-computer interface systems that connect humans or connect up the human brain to external technology to restore movement to people with paralyzed limbs using electrode arrays implanted directly on the brain surface. In the future, however, the U.S. government-backed research should enable or could enable the use of BCIs, brain-computer interfaces, without any surgery at all. They may first see use as a way of giving soldiers an advantage in the battlefield. DARPA, the U.S. military's R&D unit, which launched its next-generation non-surgical neurotechnology, their N3 program, in 2018, is seeking to create non-invasive or minimally invasive brain-computer interfaces that could allow troops to communicate with systems from aerial vehicles or cyber defense systems more quickly than they could with voice or keyboards. In short, soldiers could potentially fly drones or drive tanks with their thoughts alone. DARPA is preparing for a future in which a combination of unmanned systems, artificial intelligence, and cyber operations may cause conflicts to play out on timelines that are too short for humans to effectively manage with current technology alone, says Ali Mondi, the N3 program manager, last year, when funding for 6 projects was announced. By creating a more accessible brain-machine interface that doesn't require surgery to use, DARPA can deliver tools that allow mission commanders to remain meaningfully involved in dynamic operations that unfold at rapid speed. The research agency has awarded funding to 6 groups under the N3 program, each investigating a different method of enabling humans and machines to communicate at thought speed, but without the need for surgery. The different groups are investigating a range of approaches: ultrasound, magnetic fields, light, electric fields, and optical tomography are among the technologies being researched. Ohio-based R&D company Battelle is one of 6 groups to receive DARPA funding for a minimally invasive system that should eventually be able to gather and transmit information to soldiers' brains. Imagine this: a soldier puts on a helmet and uses his or her thoughts alone to control multiple unmanned vehicle or a bomb disposal robot, as the company explained the project last year. The aim of the project is to enhance the capability of our military and our warfighters to learn faster, to do things better, Patrick Gassner, principal research scientist at Battelle, told ZDNet. The Battelle system is based on nanoparticles and uses their electromagnetic properties to gather and communicate data to wearers. The magnetic core of the particle would convert the neural electrical signals in the brain into magnetic ones that can be sent through the skull to the helmet-based transceiver worn by the user. The helmet transceiver could also send magnetic signals back to the particles, where they would be converted into electrical impulses capable of being processed by the neurons, thus enabling two-way communication to and from the brain. Battelle's nanoparticles will be injected into a vein or inhaled, and from there can be moved into the brain by a magnetic field. DARPA's requirements for positioning the BCI are very precise. Battelle will need to be able to sight the particles within an area of 50 microns cubed, or about the width of 1 human hair. As well as the nanoparticles inside the brain, the users will need to wear a helmet-style transceiver to send and receive the signals to external systems. And there are more limitations here. The helmet has to be small, it can't be bulky, and it can't consume a lot of power, he says. The main challenge to developing non-invasive or minimally invasive BCIs are, according to DARPA, overcoming the signal-to-noise ratio and the complex physics of scattering and weakening of the signals as they pass through the skin, skull, and brain tissue. Battelle reckons the use of electromagnetic waves rather than light or ultrasound should overcome the problem. The electromagnetic energy at low frequency basically passes right through the skull. Keep in mind low frequencies, because this is going to tie into the antenna talk that we're going to get to very, very soon. Once N3 participants have worked out how to deal with the physics of the BCIs, DARPA says they can proceed to work out how to code and decode neural signals, create a single device for sensing and stimulation, testing the safety and effectiveness of the system on animals, and then move on to trialing them in human volunteers. So we're gonna stop. There's more to go on this article. You can get it out of the notes if you want. We're here, folks. We're in this new paradigm. And most of us have no idea that the paradigm has shifted and that the paradigm even exists. And that's not good.